Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is TravisShaddox. Thanks so much for joining me. We're going to get started really quick. We're going to be going over some videos today. We're going to be looking at the second part of the video we looked at. I guess it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, almost a month ago. We looked at some interpretation of soil tests and how the cold reading and Barnum effect can influence your belief in that particular topic. But first, so what I want to first do today is define cold reading and the Barnum effect so that everybody's on the same page. You can go back and watch that previous video, but I'm going to briefly explain it today as well with 2 different videos to help emphasize what it is, the cold reading and Barnum effect. Now, cold reading is essentially the tricks that fortune tellers and mediums and these people will use to read the crowd without any prior information. And so they'll use vague statements on a group of, say, 200 people until they find something that is that hits with a particular audience member, like, say, somebody's dad died. And then everybody, people say, sure, my dad died. And then they'll start talking to that person. And then the fortune teller or the trickster has to read the tells of the person, their responses back, what they're wearing, all sorts of tells that the mark can give the con artist. And they have to read it from that point forward and provide statements that are general. And what will happen is, in the mind of the victim, they'll start assigning very specific connections to vague statements. And that's the Barnum effect. So we're going to briefly show examples of that before we show the video about turfgrass. Okay, so on the screen, we're going to be looking at, I can't remember her name. What is her name? I think it's Teresa Caputo, which is better known as the Long Island Medium. She's a very well-known con artist and a scam who steals millions and millions and millions of dollars from people by scamming them and into thinking that she's talking to their dead relatives and that she can talk to, spirits and all this other stuff. And on this particular video, she was on Anderson Cooper Live. I don't know when this was, a long time ago. And she has about 200 or 250 people in the audience, and she's reading the audience. And about 2 minutes in, I'm going to show about 2-minute clip here. And at the end, Anderson brings up the point of, well, you're just making vague statements, and surely someone's going to be connected with those statements. And that's why I wanted to show this video. So here we go.
So who was buried in a red dress?
So she's in a group in a live studio with people sitting on couches, 200, 250 people sitting on couches. And who was buried in a red dress? Now, what's the chances that someone in that crowd had a relative that was buried in a red dress? Probably pretty good. Okay, so she starts with that very vague statement.
Stop it.
So in the world of turfgrass, it'd be, you ever have compacted soils? You may have compacted soils, and suddenly you go, well, yeah, no, there is a part of I have 500 lawns, and there is a lawn that's compacted. Yes, that's me. That's how it's connected to turfgrass.
You go, oh no, not me. or someone was viewed. Because they had me stand at a casket and I saw someone viewed, and I'm viewing someone's physical body, and they said, can you believe that this is how I was laid to rest?
Yeah, so keep in mind, she's standing in a red dress. Anderson Cooper has this look on his face like you're completely full of nonsense looking at her. Long Island Medium standing with a black mini dress, and there's a group of, middle-aged, all sorts of different ages people. And she comes up with these vague statements. Keep in mind, that's exactly what con artists with soil tests will do to you. You have high magnesium, so you probably have compacted soils. Don't fall victim to that, because your mind is naturally going to start thinking about compacted soils. It's like saying, don't think of pink elephants. And your mind's going to naturally start thinking of pink elephants because that's what I told you not to think of. It's already in your mind. It's the same thing with soil testing and these con artists that use these base cation saturation cons and scams to sell you a bunch of calcium that you probably don't need. So keep that in mind. That's how this is connected to turfgrass.
Or did someone, they just told me yes. So who was that? Okay.
Okay, so she's walking over.
So you thought that? You thought that about someone?
And I want you to notice how it's like a magician. Magicians are talking to you and you're looking at them, but they're doing a lot of other things that you are not aware of with their hands. They have things hidden. They're aware of certain tells. They're doing a lot of things in their mind and sorts of subterfuge that you're not aware of. And I want to point out that when the Long Island medium talks to this lady who's standing up, this elderly lady, well, elderly, whatever, I don't know how old she is, with a red dress, and she starts looking, she notices her necklace. The Long Island medium does. That's what con artists do. They notice little tells about you. In the world of soil testing, they'll notice little things like base count saturation, saturated paste is too low on phosphorus. They'll notice all these little things, and they'll keep picking at it until they find something that hits with you, whatever they can find to convince you to buy their product or what convince you of whatever it is they're trying to convince you of. But notice what she says about the details of this lady here. Watch.
Open, and she was more beautiful than ever before.
And when it comes to soil testing and mediums and things like this, anything you say is a tell. The con artist is a professional at this. They need information in order to determine which direction they choose to go. So if they say, well, you have a lot of magnesium in your soil, you must be compacted. If you say, no, everything's perfectly fine, there's no compaction at all, then they got to go find something else. Well, I mean, saturated paste, you're pretty low on potassium. No, just apply potassium every week. And every week at like a tenth of a pound of potassium. It's not potassium. So they keep going. If you keep cutting them off, they don't know where to go. If you don't tell them anything, they don't know where to go. But if you go, yeah, it's compacted. Yeah, no, you're right. I haven't applied phosphorus. I'm low on potassium, whatever the case is. It's those tells that they can pick up on and continue to pursue that particular direction.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
My mother was in a fuchsia dress, and she was viewed. And when she died, she was holding my hand, and she said, the light, it's so bright. And I says, Mom, it's okay to go.
And is your dad also departed as well?
And like I said before in the previous month ago, I don't see anything that I've ever encountered that's more despicable and disgusting than these con artists preying on these people who have recently had someone pass away. They're vulnerable. They're open to being consoled. And in this particular case, she's live on Anderson Live, and she's not doing it for money, but she does this for money. Con artists do this for money. They steal money from these people at a time of vulnerability. Almost nothing's more disgusting than this to me. Makes me sick.
Oh,
yes.
And the same thing happens with soil testing and base count saturation. Exact same thing. Makes me sick to no end. I was on the phone last night with a relative of mine. She was like, what gets you so hot? I just get so upset and passionate about our industry being polluted and deceived by these fraudsters when it comes to selling products based on soil tests. Well, that's fine if the soil test indicates that, but they're not doing it the evidence-based way. They're doing it any way they can, even if it's fraudulent. It drives me nuts. And it's the same thing here with this Long Island medium.
Yes.
So know that they are together.
Oh, I know it. They were Mutt and Jeff in real life, and now I'm sure they're together again.
She wants you to know how beautiful she looked when she was laid to rest. Because I don't know if people commented on her dress or said, or you didn't know what to bury her in, whatever it was. I felt like it was perfect.
Yeah, all these vague statements, and she just keeps moving. I don't know this and that and everything, and then she's going to pick up on something. You'll see.
It was.
Did you not put shoes? What was with the shoes?
Everything had to be this dyed to match, and she was at 82, 3, 4. I'm not sure right now because I'm nervous, but for her 80th birthday, we took her to Las Vegas because that was the love of her life, is gambling.
But you buried her with the shoes?
Yes.
There was the shoes. So the shoes were fuchsia as well?
Yeah, dyed to match.
Stop it.
We're sisters, and it is her mother,
and whose
too.
spouse is passed?
There's a lady behind her that's crying. I mean, it just makes me want to just vomit. This just vile behavior. Convincing these people that they can speak to their dead relatives, convincing you that you need to apply calcium because your magnesium's too high and because you have compacted soils because your magnesium. Just disgusting.
Oh, wait, you have the religious, whose are those? Are you wearing someone's religious articles? I said that earlier, didn't I?
See, she notices all these little things, all these little details. Don't think this is just happenstance, accident. These con artists are successful because they can pick up on all these little details. Same thing in soil tests.
Okay, whose is that?
My grandmother.
Perfect, because I said it's either mother or grandmother that's wearing the and are you wearing rosary beads too?
Yes.
Oh my, you didn't feel like raising your hand?
Yeah, see? Notice the rosary beads. You notice you have a cross on your necklace. Then, therefore, you can assume the person's probably Christian. Wearing rosary beads, you can assume they're probably Catholic. And then there's details about that specific denomination of Christianity or religion that Long Island Medium can pick up on. It's the same thing with soul testing. You pick up on a little bit of magnesium, and then you see the mark, the victim says, "Oh yeah, I do have maybe some compacted areas." Then they can pick up on that and go down that road. Oh, well, you need some calcium to knock off that magnesium. It's just, it's there's really no difference between this.
You're gonna embarrass me on Anderson like that? No wonder why my picture isn't up in the hallway.
That's right.
But for those.
So here comes Anderson Cooper and the consummate skeptic. You'll see what he says.
Some people watching this will say, and I'm a
Absolutely.
skeptic, will say, look, you're, in a room of 250 people, whatever, somebody will certainly have had Alzheimer's.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You're dealing with one customer on a soil test who has 100 lawns, 500 lawns, 1,000 lawns, or a superintendent who has 18 fairways or whatever the case is, 19 greens, and all these things. There's going to be areas of the facility or areas of your customer base that may have symptoms that are consistent with what this con artist is telling you on soil tests. Oh yeah, this magnesium's too high. You got to knock it off because you have compaction. Oh yeah, no, I do have compaction. Your brain is naturally going to think that way. It's important that we are at least aware that these are very specified and identifiable scams, so that you can defend yourself. That knowledge is very valuable.
Well, that's the thing. Unfortunately, we all lost someone in our lives.
See, she knows. She knows she knows she can start with a broad statement and come back down to the refined statements as she picks up on tells.
We all lost somebody, and we also lose someone to a heart attack, lung cancer, just cancer. Yes, all those things are common.
Yeah, see, she knows. See? And then she'll say, it's the details. She can refine down, and that's what con artists do. They'll refine down the details once they use the broad statement to find a mark, and then they'll read the tells off that mark to come up with the details.
But it's the details that Spirit gives is what is mind-blowing and phenomenal. What would make...
Okay, so that's the Long Island Medium. That's a perfect example of cold reading. That's what she does for a living, and it's millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars have been scammed from people from this type of behavior. Well, probably billions from all over the world, but from this particular, just Teresa Caputo, is her name Caputo? Teresa Caputo, just her alone is worth tens of millions, hundreds of millions each year doing this. It's insane. And so in the world of soil testing, it's really no different when it comes to people that are selling products on base kind saturation, saturated paste, these ion exchange beads. They don't know. They're just trying to find anything on that test that can convince you that you need to buy their product. So now, when they use the cold reading effect, which is the ability to read off somebody without any prior knowledge and convince you what they're saying is true, what happens in your mind as the victim is what's called the Barnum effect. And the Barnum effect is a legitimate psychological effect that occurs when people assign very specific relationships to vague statements. Okay, now we're going to watch a short little, maybe 1 minute clip on the explanation of the Barnum effect.
The Barnum effect describes the tendency for people to accept generalized personality descriptions as accurate descriptions of their own unique personality. In a famous experiment, psychologist Bertram Forer asked 39 of his students to take the Diagnostic Interest Blank Test.
Okay, so Forer was the person who first identified this. It was originally called the Fourier effect, and he did a test. He's going to explain the test briefly, but this is in the literature that you can actually go look up and see this actual study that he conducted. But listen closely how these people, the students, responded to the treatment.
Following the test, each student received an individual personality sketch based on their test results, and were asked to rate on a scale of 0 to 5 how accurately it revealed basic characteristics of their personality. They were also asked to rate how effective they thought the test was in revealing personality. The students were convinced. they gave their personality sketches an average accuracy rating of 4.26, while scoring the effectiveness of the test an average of 4.31.
So the students were given a test, and they received a personality profile essentially of each individual student, and the students were asked, how accurate is this? And they said it's highly accurate and it's very effective. 1 out of 5 scale, they rated a 4.2 and a 4.3, very high rating that this personality profile fit them very well.
Students didn't know, however, was that they all received exactly the same personality sketch. Not only were they all the same, but Fora had taken the statements within the sketch from a newsstand astrology book and had absolutely no correlation with the students' test results. They included statements such as, "You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. And you pride yourself as an independent thinker and do not accept others' statements without satisfactory proof." These are Barnum statements. Statements which are vague, true for most people, and often describe positive, desirable qualities which almost anyone can relate to.
And that's about the shortest, succinct explanation of the Barnum effect I know of. And it happens all the time. Happens all the time. We're talking about soul tests today, but this happens all the time from marketing in our industry, turfgrass industry. Very broad, vague statements that your brain, your mind tries to think of how that can relate to me. Essentially, is this actually true in my situation? Oh, it can be true in this particular lawn. Oh, I do know that part of the lawn is actually, problematic or whatever the case might be. Okay. So that's cold reading and the Barnum effect. And the reason I'm bringing all that up, of course, is because we're watching a video called I Did a Soul Test, and now what do I do with Joel Simmons? And Joel Simmons does cold reading a lot. He uses statements like, "Oh, you ever walk through the mud and it sticks to your boot?" Which happens in every soil on the planet that's muddy. I mean, that's going to happen with everybody. Anybody that walks through mud, it's going to stick to your shoe. Show me any mud in the world that won't stick to your boot. It's a ridiculously broad statement, but you're going to go, "Yeah, that's true." If you're not aware of this particular scam, you're going to go, "Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, you're right." And in this case, he's scamming Oli Pool, who this particular channel is the Oli Pool channel. And originally, last month when I went over the first part of this video, I don't know either one of these people, and I don't know their backgrounds, and not that much. And I thought initially that Oli was the mark and a victim. And since then, some people on the channel have emailed me or texted me and said, "Well, Oli does this or that or whatever." And, I don't know. I don't want to perpetuate any misinformation, but there was some information given to me that basically convinced me that Oli might not be a victim. Okay. He may actually be in on the scam. I don't know. Okay. I don't know either one of them, so I hesitate to say that. But one way or the other, whether he's the victim or whether he's part of the whole situation, he is, in this particular example, sitting in the role of the mark, meaning that he's been marked and he's being conned into believing that he needs to apply all this stuff based on a soil test or based upon base count saturation on a soil test. And so that's the reason I went over the initial explanation of what is cold reading and the Barnum effect. So we're going to hit play. We're going to watch this video, and at the end, I'm going to have maybe a brief little abstract of a scientific article if we have time. So we've already watched the first 22 minutes. Please go back and watch the first 22 minutes I did maybe a month ago on part 1. And now we're going to he's been talking about base count saturation, about how his magnesium's low and his soils are compacted and all this other stuff. And at this point, he hasn't really even talked about the quality of the turf at all. And he hasn't talked about the legitimate component of soil testing, and that is the extractable amount, meaning parts per million or pounds per acre. That's the metric that is used and correlated with plant responses, not base count saturation, not the percentage of calcium and magnesium on the exchange site. That's all scams and cons, and there's no evidence to support that in the literature at all. So now we're going to get into the more legitimate component of the soil test, and let's see where he goes.
Can you pull up on this same page the actual soil test report?
The data?
Yeah, the data sheet. There you go. So when you look at this, and I'm going to have to put my glasses on to read this, but when you look at this, it lays it out really, really nicely. And so you can see you've got, you've got a over a 600-pound deficiency of calcium.
Okay, so I'm going to read this because Joel is so delusional that he's going to mislead you and say things that are just simply not true. And I want to make sure the listeners are aware what the numbers are. The nutrient holding capacity, which is the cation exchange capacity, is 9.2. Now, the scam artists and the con artists who sell base cation saturation, their books will tell you it doesn't really work on soils less than about 10. That comes from the Bear 45 paper, as well as other books on base cation saturation, like The Art of Balancing Soils, Hands-on Agronomy. These books will have values where they say, it doesn't really, base cation saturation balancing doesn't really work below about 9 or 10. And this soil is at 9.2. Okay, so let's be aware that even on this soil, even the scam in their own criteria, this soil doesn't even meet that, and yet he's still going down these roads. Now, that was the CEC. The pH of the soil is 5.4. I'm not overly concerned about that at all. Anything between 5 and 8 is generally not a problem. If you get down in the low 5s and you happen to have some aluminum and manganese in your soil, it could be a problem in terms of toxicity of aluminum and manganese. But I'm not overly concerned about the pH of 5.4. I might not want to be putting out ammonium sulfate per se at that low pH because you're going to continue to drive it down, but it's not alarming. It's fairly common. Perfectly good grass can, maybe not in this case, but it can be grown at 5.4, no problem, depending on the soil and the plant and so forth. Organic matter is 5%. Now, the sulfur parts per million is 14. I don't know the depth of this soil sample, so I can't really say one way or the other, but generally sulfur in the double digits is fine. The phosphorus, now he's going to have it in pounds per acre. Okay, and again, I don't know the depth of the soil sample. I'm going to assume it's 6 inches, but I don't know if he took it at 3 or 4. I don't know. Let's say it was 6 inches, and if I'm wrong, then someone can correct me. If it's 6 inches, then the parts per million is half that, which is 400 parts per million. The limit on phosphorus in terms of critical is probably somewhere in the 10 to 20 range parts per million MEIC3, and he's at 400. Okay, so he doesn't need any phosphorus the next 100 years or more. I mean, it's going to take a very, very long time unless he's harvesting the soil to get that phosphorus to go down. And then the calcium, which Joel says is deficient by 600 pounds. The value, now this is going to be in pounds per acre, and we're just going to divide it by 2, assuming it was a 6-inch soil depth. The value for calcium in terms of the critical limit that most soil nutritionists and turfgrass nutritionists would kind of be comfortable with usually is somewhere probably around the 300 or 400 parts per million MEIC3, somewhere around that number. I've seen perfectly good grass grow less than that. But generally, when you get down to the 300 parts per million MEIC3 range, you're probably risking a little bit too much. But we don't have good numbers on that. Why? Because it's difficult to find a soil low enough in calcium to actually see a response to applying calcium. We don't have a lot of correlations with calcium and MEIC3 on turf grasses. But if we assume it's 300 or 400, Oli is at 900. So he's at least double the critical limit of calcium, minimum double. And Joel says he's 600 pounds deficient. Okay. Keep that in mind. Magnesium, we don't have great numbers on magnesium, but it's probably 20 to 30 parts per million, something like that. And Oli here is at about, what would that be? 70 parts per million, 70, 75 parts per million. So he's well in excess of any magnesium deficiency he'd ever see. And potassium's probably, as we mentioned on the channel before, on this test, the potassium somewhere, again, around 70, 75 parts per million. And we've shown that the potassium limits, depending on the turf grass and so forth, if you're in the 40s to 50s, you're probably fine, parts per million MEIC3. Anything greater than about 50 parts per million MEIC3 is fine. You probably you wouldn't see any benefit to applying potassium if your soil is at around 50 parts per million MEIC3. And Oli here is at about 70 to 80, something like that. So he has enough potassium, he has enough magnesium, he has enough calcium, he has enough phosphorus. Okay. So there's really nothing on this soil test that I would look at and go, yeah, I mean, clearly you have an issue here, and whatever you're seeing in the turf, let's look at it and see if it's related to this particular element. So in my world, I would want to go look at his turf grass and see if it's a water, light, temperature, or damage issue. But in my world, I would look at this and go, okay, I don't really see a whole lot of things you need to be overly concerned about. I would want to look at the turf always first, but based upon what the turf looks like, and I posted a video or a picture on the community about a manganese toxicity that I ran into last week. Manganese deficiency. These nutrient deficiencies are very easily identified if you know what to look for. And so I would want to look at the turf so that it can tell me a lot, just the turf itself, which leaf it's on, what does it look like on the leaf, and so forth. What is the pattern of color on the leaf? That can tell a nutritionist, at least give us an idea what the nutritional concerns may be. So I would look at that, but I don't see anything on this test that's concerning. But according to Joel Simmons, who's a salesman who needs to sell a lot of product, you have a calcium deficiency. It's at 900 parts per million omega-3, you have a calcium deficiency, according to Joel Simmons.
For every 600 pounds of deficiency of calcium, you need about 45 pounds per 1,000 of limestone.
So now he's going to sell him 50-pound bag of limestone per 1,000 square feet. So he's going to sell him a ton of limestone with the pH at 5.2 and the pH at 5.4 and the calcium at 900. Now, he's going to say later something that blew my mind, but he's not applying lime for the pH. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Don't apply lime for the pH adjustment. Well, you'll hear it. Let's continue.
So in this case, I would do, I wouldn't do it all at once on this lawn, but I would come out here and do a 20 pound per 1,000 application of that dolomite. And the reason, again, why we're using dolomite here is because that magnesium has a big deficiency as well.
Yeah, on the paper, they're showing the magnesium deficiency of 117. Now, keep in mind, these deficiencies, they're all just made up in their computer system. When it says you're deficient by this much, they're just making that up. They don't. There's no evidence to indicate that indeed you are 600 pounds deficient in calcium, or in this case, 117 pounds deficient in magnesium. They're just making these limits up, completely out of thin air. Okay. What you want to look at, and I don't have a marker, but what you want to look at is the value found. This value desired value is complete hogwash. Unless it's the critical limit, unless you say, the value desired, let's say with magnesium, it'd be, 20 to 30 parts per million. So it'd be like 50 to 60 pounds per acre. Unless you're going to use the critical limit based upon the SLAN method, then you could put that there. But that's not what it is. This desired value is based upon what's found relative to what the holding capacity of the soil is. The CEC. Okay, it's not the concentration in parts per million. So that's the reason it's fraudulent. So they're just making that up. Keep in mind, don't be convinced that, I saw it on a soil test. You saw it on a soil test because they're just making it up. They're just pulling it out of thin air. Okay? Base your decision on the evidence that's in the literature, or what I read on this channel. I read a lot of literature on this channel. Okay?
So for every 600 pounds of deficiency, you're going to use what we would call a ton per acre, or 45 pounds per 1,000 of limestone. And in this case, you could, parlay that into dolomitic lime, and that would bring both the calcium and magnesium. And over time.
So you don't need to apply lime in this situation? Well, I don't know. I'm not looking at the turf. I'd want to go look at the turf. But I don't see anything on this test that would convince me that you need to apply lime or you need to apply dolomite at all. I wouldn't think you'd see any benefit in terms of turf response from either one of those applications. Unless you happen to have maybe a toxicity. You're not going to have a lumen toxicity when you're in the 5s. You're not going to see lumen toxicities till you get down to the 4s and the 3s. Manganese toxicity, again, at 5.4 pH, you're probably not ever going to see that. But I suppose you could run into some strange situation. But until you get down in the 4s, you really don't see a lot of aluminum or manganese become soluble enough to see a toxicity in turf grasses. So there's really no... you probably wouldn't see a thing happen. But I'll follow that up a little bit later when he talks about the longevity of potential responses. You'll see.
Now, calcium is slow. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to react.
So now he set the stage. You got a 2 or 3 year gap there. And lime, depending on lime, and if you use gypsum, depending on gypsum, the source, it can be very slow to completely react. You're going to get a lot of it reacting in the first 3 to 6 months, but there's going to be some, definitely takes years. But now he's got a long window, and anything you see in that window that could be a positive in your mind, your mind, your brain, or certainly in Joel's mind, he can connect that to what you did, even if it had nothing to do with it. So now he has a long, long window of opportunity for confirmation bias to set in your mind. Okay? That's critical. Because if you said you're going to apply this product and you're going to see, like, say, nitrogen, and you're going to see a response in, say, 7 to 10 days, and it's going to last, 6, 7, 8 weeks, you're going to see that, and, you're used to that, and you see that. But with calcium, you're not really ever going to see a response. Magnesium, almost never see a response to applying magnesium. But if you give me a 3-year window, I can convince you that anything I put out there, I can apply titanium out there. It's going to take a long time for that titanium to respond. It's going to take 3 or 4 years. And if anything positive happens in that 3 or 4 year window, that's an opportunity for me to confirm in your mind that indeed it was the titanium, which has no ability to affect turfgrass, was the cause of this benefit or this response that you saw. Okay, it's a very clever way of expanding the opportunity, the time of opportunity for confirmation bias to set in. Say it's a 3 or 4 year time for the lime to react, which that's probably true in many cases.
But it'll start to open up the soil physically and really make the thing happen. I tell this story in all my classes, and I'll share it here with you folks. And it's a golf course analogy, but you'll get the point. I had a golf course superintendent that came to me and he said, my soils are made of rock. And I'm looking at him kind of chuckling. I'm like, what do you mean your soils are made of rock? You can grow grass on rock? That's a talent. I mean, not many people can do that, I think I asked him if he can walk on water as well. That's kind of, the analogy I would have made there because.
So if you remember from the Wikipedia explanation of cold reading that they mentioned in there I should have pulled it up. In fact, maybe I can pull it up real quick. Let me pull up the definition real quick on Wikipedia because it's actually okay. Well, I don't see it on here. I should have had that pulled up. But what they can do on the definition of cold reading and the Barnum effect, they call it hamming it up. For those people outside the United States aren't used to the culture or the phrase hamming it up. It means if you can really tell a good story and you can really kind of, be silly and funny and tell a good story. And that's what Joel's going to do right here. He fits the definition exactly. It's fantastic. He's going to ham it up with the audience to convince them that, whatever's going on is true. In this case, it's base count saturation and applying calcium to alleviate compaction. But hamming it up and telling good stories goes a long way. In fact, there's another owner of a company in the turf industry who I've listened to speak a couple times. And it's not Joel, it's somebody else. And he's real good he drops a lot of F-bombs and S-bombs in his talks, and he gets the audience kind of giggling and laughing. And he's really good at hamming it up. And those are not always, but sometimes it's very good indication that you're dealing with a BS artist when they ham it up and tell good anecdotes and good stories. You can tell all the anecdotes you want. What I want to know is what evidence there is to support it. But keep in mind, hamming it up and kind of being chummy and slapping people on the back and drinking beers, all that's fine. But those are tactics that are used by BS artists to develop relationships and convince you of misinformation, essentially.
It's pretty hard to grow grass on a rock. And I said, do you have a soil test? And he said to me, he goes, it's not my soil. And I'm like, really? Why do you say that? And when you looked at his soil test, his pH was 6.3. 6.3 on a pH scale is the perfect pH. It's the point at which we have maximum potential nutrient mobility.
Yeah, Joel is completely delusional. I don't even know if he really even understands soils. Unfortunately, he taught the soils, from my understanding, in the 2-year program at Rutgers for many years, and thank God Rutgers fired him. But I don't think he understands soils at all. 6.3, there is no such thing as an ideal pH in all cases. That doesn't happen. If you have nitrogen deficiencies, you're going to want to have pH probably a little higher. If you have phosphorus deficiencies, you're going to want pHs perhaps a little lower than 6.3. It's all going to depend on the plant and the nutrient that is deficient that you're trying to target for solubility. You're going to say, well, it's 6.3. It's the average range where all nutrients can be soluble. That's not true at all. I don't know where this comes up from. I don't know who perpetuates this misinformation, but there are clear cases where 6.5 are very, very good, and there's clear cases where it's not, depending on the plant and the nutrients. Okay. Now, would I rather have my pH in the 6s in general? Yes, of course I would. I would rather have that. Yes. But it doesn't mean because you're in 5.8 and 5.7 and you start liming the soil, or if you're at 7.3, 7.4, you got to start throwing ammonium sulfate and sulfur out there. That doesn't mean that at all. Okay, so don't be delusional. This idea that this middle ground pH it must be 6.3, 6.5. I believe that comes from an old diagram where it shows phosphorus solubility being depressed at high pHs due to calcium connections, and then at low pHs due to aluminum and iron precipitation. And then in the middle is where maximum solubility of phosphorus occurs, and that's been shown to be inaccurate at this point. Not inaccurate. That happens. I don't mean to say inaccurate. Those happens at those extreme pHs. But the idea that you must maintain this middle pH ground for ideal nutrient availability is just nonsense. Okay? Anything between 5 and 8, it's highly unlikely that your pH is causing a problem. As I mentioned before, as your pH moves closer to 5, let's say from 6, if it moves closer to 5, then you're at more and more risk as you get closer and closer. If you move closer to 8, you get more and more at risk, and so forth. That's how to look at it. But there's a paper from Florida where there was no aluminum and iron in the soil, and the pH where the turfgrass grew greatest was 3.5. I went over that on the channel. At the higher pHs, the turfgrass did not grow as well. Okay, so there's clear examples where this idea that you must have the pH in the 6s is not accurate.
And so he looked at that pH and he saw that was the ideal pH, and he stopped looking at his soil test. But his soil test showed a huge deficiency in calcium and a big excess of magnesium. And he was trying to run an aerifier over, these were fairways on a golf course. He was trying to run an aerifier over these fairways. And this was a big professional grade aerifier, with big tines, big steel tines. And what happened was, as he was trying to drive those tines into the soil because it was so hard, he would literally snap the tine in half, right? And so he's breaking this thing. He can't get down more than an inch. He couldn't even really do more than a pass and a pass back, and he'd have to change all the tines. And it was just all but impossible. So we looked at this and we said, okay, look, you have a huge calcium deficiency. So in this case, because he had an excess of magnesium, you don't have that. But in this particular case, he had an excess of magnesium.
He does have an excess of magnesium. I showed you. He has above the critical limit.
And so we used high calcium lime or calcitic lime because there's no magnesium in there. What we were trying to do is drive the magnesium off. And so he applied 3 tons based on the soil test. He had a 3-ton deficiency. We do it in ton lots. So we did a ton in the spring, a ton in the fall, and then he did the 3rd ton the following spring. I called him and said, are you seeing anything? He goes, nah, it's not really, doing much. But he did notice that his fertilizer was working better.
Yeah, there's another tell. See, the same thing. It's not really doing much. Well, what about fertilizer use efficiency? Oh, no, yeah, maybe that's it too. It's just an odds game is what it is. It's literally playing the probabilities is what cold reading is. So you're playing the probabilities. Oh, well, my fertilizer's working a little bit better and my tines aren't popping off. And, it's all it is.
Because things were starting to happen. He called me a year later, almost to the day. And he said, you won't believe this, but I just ran 6 fairways on his property, and he didn't break a single time. He changed the physical environment of the soil by flocculating it, by getting the...
He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that at all. He's just making it up. How do you know it got flocculated, Joel? Did you go out and measure it? Did you go out and measure the bulk density, the cation exchange capacity, or the saturated hydraulic conductivity? Did you go measure that somehow? How do you know? You're just making it up. It's unbelievable.
Proper amount of limestone in there. And it took, this is now 2 years later. So it took time. Limestone is typically a 3-year cycle to really work its way through.
That can be true.
And he realized that the soil was just opened up. He could aerify it. But what he did was he drove that aerifier off of his fairway into the rough, the side off of the fairway soil that he did not treat with limestone. And as soon as he hit that, he broke that machine. He broke
the machine. He broke the machine and broke the tines when he drove it into the fairway. Drove it into the rough. I love these anecdotes. And this is the reason we do science, we do studies properly, is that we account for these variables and variations, all right? We account for error. Oh, I drove it into the fairway or drove it into the rough and broke my tines. Well, was the rough irrigated? Did it have the same moisture level? All these things we account for in science. But when you're on a tractor going around and you're like, oh, I did this and it's working great here. I went into the rough and broke my tractor and broke all the tines off or whatever. And then you're talking to a scam artist who's trying to convince you to sell, to buy their products based upon applying calcium to loosen up the soil. That's confirmation bias. That's what that is. So be careful. There's all sorts of variables, all sorts of things that could have caused that. Like I said, water alone could easily, if you're only irrigating the fairway and you're not irrigating the rough, which is probably a wise idea in some cases, that alone is going to result in a more a harder soil outside because there's no lubricant from water. Okay. Kunhan Pharaoh, you're always fun to read. You sent me something a day or two ago. I can't remember now what it was, but I laughed my butt off about that. So thank you. Thank you for the comments.
The tines on that machine, and he had to go into the shop and replace them. So that's when he called me. What he did,
I've aerified a fair amount in my life. In Florida mostly, and where it's mostly sands, and you break tines. There's just no other way around it. You're going to break tines. Okay, you're going to snap them off. That's the reason you paint the top of them yellow or red, or you put a little some identifier on there. So when the thing breaks off and lands in the soil, it just comes off the machine itself. You can go back and see it in the grass, so you don't run over it with the mower. Okay, this is going to happen. Okay, you're going to break tines. They're going to snap off. And that's again another tell. It's a very vague statement that this particular superintendent, unfortunately, was marked by Joel, who connects that in terms of confirmation bias. Well, yeah, no, I broke off these tines. You're gonna break tines. It's just the way it is. Okay, you're gonna have mud stick to your boot. It's the way it is. You're gonna have areas that are compacted. It's the way it is. These are all common scenarios. Okay, very, very common. But just because you broke off a tine and then you move over here and you didn't break off a tine has nothing to do, is not convincing at all that some application I did a year ago or 2 years ago somehow loosened up the soil. It's an absurd argument.
Was he flocculated the soil by getting the calcium levels balanced.
You don't know that. This is what drives me nuts, is that con artists can just say whatever they want. And the tree octopus, thanks, Coonhound Pharaoh. You remind that you can just say whatever you want. We have a Pacific Northwest tree octopus. You can say anything you want on the internet, and some people are naturally going to believe it. There's going to be a percentage of people that believe it. It's just the way it is. Okay, and it's the scientists. It's the people driving the bus the people that know how to drive the bus are in the minority. And we're looking forward. We're not looking in the back of the bus. And in the back of the bus are the majority of our clients. And there's a class clown in the back of the bus saying, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I would naturally want to look at the class clown too. It's easy to look at the class clown. It's not easy to sit up there and talk to the bus driver who knows how to drive the bus, knows the safety, knows where he's going. That's boring. The class clown with the lampshade in the back, jumping up and down saying, look at me. That's who's fun to look at. We continue.
And what was happening was, because the soil was so tight, he was using about 10 pounds of nitrogen per year.
Oh, man, I totally forgot to mention this. I have a score sheet. And from the last video, I had 8 balances. I forgot to do this. And I have tight and compacted. And, man, I missed a bunch. I'm going to say there's 5 compacted so far. There's 8 balance times he says balances. And the reason I'm doing this, I have a score sheet here on a sticky pad, and I totally messed up this whole video because I wasn't keeping score. But I'll do that from now on. But tight and compacted is very common. And he's going to say this over and over and over. Okay, guys, I want everybody to know why I'm keeping the score sheet. At the end, if I have time, I'm gonna go over why I'm keeping the score sheet. But you're gonna say things over and over and over. Balance. You got to balance the soil, calcium, magnesium, tight and compacted, all these things. And so if you're playing along and you're playing the drinking game, like I think it was Ryan DeMay mentioned, playing the drinking game with the number of times every time he says something, you got to take a drink. You're going to be hammered at the end of these videos.
Which, by the way, when you use that much nitrogen, which is a horrible number to use, you would never want to do that in your lawn or really in a golf course or any environment. He was growing a lot of thatch. So he had this really matty root system that was just growing because there was no biology to digest it. We dropped him from 10 pounds of nitrogen down to 2 pounds of nitrogen. We got him on some replenish, and he got some carbon in there, started really working that. We got him down to 1 pound of nitrogen for the year. He had better drainage. On a golf course, when the soil's tight and it rains, they can't put golf carts out on the fairways. So he couldn't get golf carts out on a normal soil for days if it's a really heavy rain. Once he started to get this change made, he was able to get golf carts out on those fairways in an afternoon, if not even sooner. He went from 10 pounds to 2 pounds to 1 pound. He was a lot happier. He had better rooting. He had better germination. I always make this stupid joke, but the happiest one in his family was his dog, because he would come home all angry and pissed off, and he would kick the dog. He didn't do that. I just make that up. But the point,
again, hamming it up, just like I mentioned earlier. If you go from 10 pounds, I don't know why you'd be playing 10 pounds of nitrogen. I agree with Joel on that. I don't know why on earth you'd be playing 10 pounds of nitrogen on fairways, although I do know, like, I'm going to leave the names out of it. I do know of a superintendent that's applying twice that in Florida, whatever. But if you go from 10 to 2 to 1, now you're at 1 pound on your fairways. I want to see that. I want to see his documents where he's growing. I mean, unless it's a cow farm, cow pasture, I want to see where you're growing a fairway on a high end or even medium golf course, and it looks acceptable at 1 pound of nitrogen per year. Anywhere besides, like, northern Minnesota or something, somewhere where it's fairly warm. I doubt that that's happened. All these anecdotes, Joe, it went from 10 pounds to 2 pounds to 1 pound, and he applied calcium and flocculated the soil and then busting tines off. All these are anecdotes. That's all it is. Okay? The plural of anecdote is not data. I don't care how many anecdotes you got. If you have 1,000 people stand out there and they all saw the same thing, they're all 1,000 anecdotes, it doesn't mean anything to me. In fact, there's a very famous experience in Spain, and I think it was the 1930s or maybe the 20s, I can't remember, called the Miracle of the Sun. Go look it up. And all these people are standing out on the hill, and thousands of people are standing out on the hill, and they're praying, and they're all out there, jubilant, and they see the sun split into 2 different suns. So there was 2 different suns in Spain. It's called the Miracle of the Sun. Please go look it up. And all of them swear to it. All 1,000. It's in the newspapers. There's articles all over the place, and 100 years ago, and all of it, hundreds and hundreds of people witnessed all the same thing. Now, do you actually think the sun split into 2 and we wouldn't notice it? The gravitational pull on the Earth. You wouldn't notice any changes in the celestial mechanics of our solar system when there's 2 suns. Okay? Of course it didn't happen. But thousands and thousands of people say it did happen. Thousands and thousands of anecdotes are not data. Okay? Keep that in mind. This is just all anecdotes. These are all just stories. And the books and stuff that at least the ones recently in the last 10, 20 years that promote this nonsense, like the Art of Balancing Soils, like Hands-on Agronomy, they're just loaded with these types of stories. It's all it is. It's just a bunch of anecdotes. It's all it is. Okay, so don't be convinced. You can sit and have a good conversation and just have, shooting the S with everybody and having a beer and talking these stories. That's fine, but don't let it convince you that you should change your behavior or that it's true or something. Don't let those stories convince you.
Point is that the stress level was intense. He just wasn't successful, and if he had stayed, what he had learned was, you lime to pH. You don't lime to pH. You lime to calcium levels.
I'm going to rewind that. That if I had watched this before I created the BS criteria, I would have put this on there for sure. Let's listen to what Joel said again. This is genius. Listen again. You don't lime to pH. Here, listen.
That up. But the point is that the stress level was intense. He just wasn't successful. And if he had stayed, what he had learned was, you lime to pH. You don't lime to pH, you lime to calcium levels. And in your
You don't lime to pH. You lime to calcium levels. That's fantastic. I've got to put that on a shirt, and then underneath it, just put it in quotes and put Joel Simmons. You don't lime to pH. You lime to calcium levels. Then why don't you just apply gypsum? Something else with calcium that doesn't affect pH. And this was the exact problem with William Albrecht. He didn't understand that his treatments for calcium saturation were affecting the pH. He didn't understand that. Okay? He said it's not important. I may have a connection issue here. I don't know. If I have if something's wrong, let me know. I'm having some sort of disconnection here. Sorry about that. If you're having, if there's a blip in the broadcast, sorry, I'm having some issues. I may have to get like a whole new system because I'm having some computer lagging issues. Anyway, the point is, William Albrecht didn't understand that. Okay. Oh, thanks, Zach. I got a warning saying I somehow got disconnected. I apologize. I don't know. I got to figure out something with my computer. He didn't understand that. William Albrecht didn't understand that. You're applying these liming, in his case, he was applying clays, but you're applying products that affect the calcium situation, but they also affect the pH. Okay. And it was the pH that was affecting nodulation in Albrecht's case. It wasn't the calcium levels. And then the same thing here. It's just a repeat of the same thing. You lime to calcium levels. You don't lime to pH. That's what he just said. It's mind-boggling that this can even exist in our industry nowadays. But it exists. It's very prevalent. He just said it.
In your case, pulling up that sample, you need some calcium in there. And obviously
you don't need calcium. He had like 900 parts per million calcium. It's unbelievable.
Yours is a little bit easier because you do have a low pH. So we want to bring that pH up to about a 6.3, 6.5.
I couldn't give two flips about soil pH unless it is convincing to me that the pH is actually resulting in an undesirable plant. Like I said, there's clear cases where Bermuda grass can grow best in 3s and 4s than in 5s and 6s. Okay, so it's not just a number on a soil test; it's the plant interaction. It's the plant itself. That's what I care about the most.
And you'll do that by getting dolomitic lime in there, and you'll see a big difference. Now, you might not see it tomorrow. You might not even see it next year. But I would recommend in this case getting about 20 pounds of dolomitic down this fall, and then doing it again per 1,000 square feet, and then doing it again next spring, and then retest. And then let's look at it come next fall, about this time of year, and let's see where that calcium level might lie. It might tell us that we need more. We would want to, we'd want to back out some of the lime you've already got in there because it's still reacting, but we can figure all those numbers out.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Oh, we'll test it again. We'll apply more. Not a shred or a single millisecond of thought's been given. What does a turf look like? You notice you haven't seen that at all in this video yet. What does the turf look like? What is it exhibiting? What do the leaves look like? What does the growth look like? All these things. What is your water? What time of year is it? All these things, nothing. It's all just numbers on a soil test because that's what you can sell off of. Okay?
All right. Well, here is another one.
Ooh.
That is North Carolina. And, I just talked with this fella on Sunday, and he was telling me how his yard looks so good in the spring, and then we've had a rough summer anyway, but he's about lost everything. Like, it just went to pieces.
Because it's compacted. It's really tight.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know. How do you know, Joel? What is the bulk density of that soil? You don't know the bulk density. It's nowhere on this test. Now let's look at, real briefly, I'm going to come back. I'm not done yet. Okay, I'm going to go for another 20 or 30 minutes here. Let's look at a brief little PDF about soil compaction. This is from Penn State from ages and ages ago. This is about agriculture, okay? Because it's compacted. How do you know? There's no information. All this information's here. You can download it. It's called The Effects of Soil Compaction by the College of Agricultural Science, Agricultural Research, and Cooperative Extension from Penn State. And you can go down through here. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to go down and point out a few things here. One, you'll notice nowhere in this entire document that mentions magnesium. Nowhere does it mention gypsum or calcium. Nowhere. Okay. So we go through here and talks about compaction and tillage and so forth. And then we look at this little graph here, figure here, figure 6. Okay. And figure 6 has bulk density on the y-axis and percent water on the x-axis, and just has general increases on both sides. And it says the surface of long-term no-till soil cannot be compacted to as great a density as conventional tilled soil due to higher organic matter contents. And this was in the Thomas Hasler and Blevin's 1996 paper in Soil Science. Okay, I believe Soil Science is that's the European or the English journal, I believe. Anyway, the point is, conventional till is having a higher bulk density. Bulk density, grams per cubic centimeter. That's compaction. That's the measure or the unit of compaction. And when you're tilling the soil, you're likely to result in greater compaction than if you don't till it. So how does this work in turfgrass? If you're airifying and slicing it and all these things, don't expect the bulk density to go down. Expect it to go up. In some cases, we have to do these cultural practices because the turfgrass requires it. Okay, we require to remove some thatch, or we require to cultivate the soil plant system in some way, because the end result in some cases, many cases, is that the turf will be of greater quality or greater performance or whatever. But the soil component is going to be more compacted if you're going to disturb the soil or cultivate the soil in some way. Okay, keep that in mind. So we go down here, soil density, soil bulk density. I'm going to zoom in on this so everybody understands what I'm talking about. If I can get in on this particular table. I can't. I don't think I can. Table 1. Okay, table 1. The ideal and root restricting bulk densities. Now this is for agriculture, but in very, very generally, in very general sense, it's very consistent with turfgrass as well. Okay, they have the soil texture on this column, and then we have the ideal bulk density and the bulk density that restricts root growth. Now, this is going to vary by turf grasses and plants, and there's going to be some variation in this, the area that's going to be the amount that's required for a restriction of plant growth. But if you're in a sandy loam soil, the ideal bulk density is around 1.6. If you're in a silt loam, it's 1.3. Silty clay loam, it's 1.4. A sand clay, silty clay, all these different ones. Clay is much more dense, 1.1. And then sandy loam, all these densities. So anywhere between like 1.1 and 1.6 is you're probably not compacted to the point where it would restrict plant growth. The bulk densities that are known to be compacted enough, the soil compacted enough, or the bulk density is high enough, are more like 1.7 to 1.9. And you'll see with the clay, it's 1.5 basically. If you have a very clay soil, then the bulk density can be 1.5 and still restrict plant growth. But in these sandy loam clays or sandy loamy sands, it's 1.8. If you're up in the 1.8s, then yeah, you're probably having a compaction issue to the point where it's going to restrict plant growth. But nowhere in any of this nonsense from base count and saturation will you ever see a chart like that, because it's going to refute basically everything that they're saying. Okay. You see a table like this and you say, okay, well, I see, that makes sense. We've done this work. We know, give or take, the bulk density is anything less than about 1.6 or so, something around 1.6, 1.7. You're probably not encountering a constriction that's so bad that you'd need to alleviate that compaction. So when you know this, then, and let's say the soil that they're dealing with is say 1.6, 1.5 or whatever, you're probably not having a compaction issue at all. Okay. But you're not going to see this, because when you see these data, it's going to refute them. It's going to refute their BS If they went out and did an actual bulk density rating and measured it, and it was greater than, say 1.7, 1.8, and you'd go, okay, well, that's a risk factor. You may end up having an issue there, which you could probably find at the end of every cart path, okay, where the carts go off the cart path. You probably find the densities up there in that number, okay? Could be. But the solution is not applying calcium because the magnesium's too high. You're physically compacting the soil with carts. How the hell is calcium going to, loosen that soil up? There's nothing in the soil that calcium would have an effect on, unless it's a sodium soil, unless it's a sodic soil. Okay, but this little PDF from Penn State is nice. Effective soil compaction. Go download it. It's actually quite interesting. It's very general, but it's really good for the basic soil person, or plant person. You can go through and read some basic things you can do, and water infiltration and root growth, and kind of how it restricts certain things. It's good in a very general sense. And it has some managing soil compaction recommendations, and it'll avoid the traffic, and so forth, lower the loads and all these things. And nowhere in here is there apply gypsum or apply lime or apply calcium or alleviate the magnesium. Nowhere in there you won't see any of that. Okay, it's ridiculous. But you'll see it from every base kind of saturationist. Every one of them, they have to have that in there. Okay, so we're going to continue for a little bit longer here today.
Right. And what's driving this soil is magnesium. Look at that. Look at that bar on this.
Look at that bar that I completely made up on my software program to make it go up into the red. It has nothing to do with, there's no evidence to support that. But in our software program, I made it do that so that I can convince the end user that they need to adjust the magnesium down. Look at that bar. That magnesium's too high. What if you're in, okay, Joe, what if you're in a soil that has almost no montmorillic clays or no smectites at all? None. Let's say that's the case. What would magnesium do in that case? You could have 40% magnesium. How is it going to restrict or result in compaction or restrict root growth when you have no clays that are going to shrink and swell? It's not. So you can't, he just makes this up. It's completely fabricated, guys.
Second one down. Mm-hmm. So the calcium is slightly low. The magnesium is excessive.
For those listening, he's looking in at these bar charts and these little red and green dials he's not looking at the quantity or the extractable levels. Okay.
And again, remember, if we're dealing with 100% here, and we've got this glass and we have it full of something in it, and I put something in, something's coming out. So in this case, I'm going to add some limestone, and I'm going to push out that magnesium, and that's going to open up the soil. So
it's all nonsense. It's going to open up the soil. Again, I've mentioned this before. Anyone, all the phone number's in the description, my email's in the description. Send me anything, any refereed paper in a reputable impact factor turfgrass journal, any paper. I don't care. And you know what? Not even turfgrass, any paper from any agricultural setting that has any evidence that this is true. And I will read it on the air. I will talk about it on the air. No problem at all. Not an issue. Send me all of William Albrecht's papers. No problem. All his books, send them to me. Okay? Believe me, you don't want to do that. But if you do, I will read them on the air. Okay? You're not going to find any valid evidence in any of those papers. You're going to find misunderstandings, misconceptions, conflation of pH with calcium saturation, or just complete dismissal of pH completely. Remember, it's William Albrecht, the one who started this base concentration nonsense, who said the plants don't really respond to pHs effectively. The pH isn't really that big of an issue. That came from the person who started base concentration. Well, it didn't start it, but he really perpetuated it in the 50s. Okay?
In this case, because he's already got a decent amount of calcium, he's going to use a little bit of high calcium lime here. I would use maybe 15 to 20 pounds of high calcium lime this fall. And then probably follow up with gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, not limestone. And that'll continue to help drive that magnesium down. I would continue to use potassium. Anytime you put something into your cup, something's coming out. Again, here's a pretty high slug of sodium. That's only because it can't get out. But this soil would be very tight. He would benefit from aerification. He would definitely benefit from replenish because
Well, let me ask you this. If it's tight, oh man, I keep losing track. That's like I keep missing it. That's 8 tights now and 8 balances. if it's tight, and if what you're saying is true, Joel, and you apply calcium to loosen up the soil, then why would you need to aerify? If your solution to compaction is applying calcium, why do you need to aerify? Stop aerifying. Why do you need both? I'm waiting. You can call or send me an email anytime, Joel. Thank you.
Carbon will start to open up that soil as well.
Carbon. Oh, that's another one. That's 3 carbons, at least 3 carbons. I'm falling behind here.
So again, it's a systems approach. The first thing in the system is the limestone to drive down some of that magnesium. And as that magnesium falls, so will fall the pH. The pH will start to come into the 6s.
Not if you're applying lime. Someone who's as ignorant as Joel Simmons doesn't understand that lime, the limestone itself, calcium carbonate, is the pH is not affected by the calcium. It's affected by the carbonate. The calcium enters the soil. It exchanges the hydrogen and aluminum that's on the exchange site, the acidic cations. Those hydrogen and aluminums that were not available to be precipitated out are now in soil solution where they can be precipitated out. But they're not going to precipitate out unless there's something in there to precipitate with, like carbonate. Okay, so if you're in a pH, let's say you're in pH, what was this? I don't know this particular soil pH, but let's say you're in 7.5 or something, whatever he was saying, and you're going to apply a lime. Joel's ignorant argument is, I'm going to apply lime to lower the soil pH. It's not possible, because in order to lower the soil pH, you have to have hydrogen and or aluminum enter the soil solution so it can be measured with an electrode. The second it enters in solution, it's going to be precipitated out with the carbonate that you applied with the lime. Okay? So this is all science, Joel. You may be allergic to it. This is evidence. I know some people are allergic to evidence, and that's on the BS disorder criteria form that I have now. In fact, maybe we should fill that out too for Joel. So maybe we can diagnose him. But it's not going to happen. You cannot have a more acidic situation, meaning more hydrogen activity in the soil solution, when you're also applying a carbonate source, like calcium carbonate, because it's going to bind out. Ignorance to no end.
I'll give you another quick example. I had a situation. I remember this very vividly.
Okay,
very
here comes
early.
Another anecdote. We're in this video. I'm still only 30 minutes into this thing, and he's probably got like 3 or 4 anecdotes, hamming it up in anecdotes. It's critical. It's key for base concentration con men to convince you. We got to talk about anecdotes. We ought to talk about all these things where we did something and we saw something and something worked. Therefore, you should do it too. That's critical.
In my career, I saw a soil sample that looked very much like this. And it was a golf course superintendent. And I walk in, I said, "Hey, Mr. Superintendent, you got a very high pH. I recommend a lot of limestone." And you can imagine how well that went over, you know, and when I got his boot out of my pants as he tried to kick me out of the shop.
Hamming it up. Remember, he's hamming it up.
I said, "Look, let's play with this on one fairway." So he put down some high calcium lime. And within about 6 months, we dropped a 7.4 down to a 6.8, because what was driving the pH, as is true in this case, was the magnesium. And
Okay, so if you want anybody with any knowledge on soil science to believe you, Joel, publish it. And then we'll talk. Until then, it's just anecdotes and tree octopuses is all it is. Okay, so if you want anybody with any knowledge on soil science to believe you, Joel, publish it. Do this instead of telling me an anecdote that you did something and the superintendent did something and you applied lime. Publish it. Where's your paper? Okay, show me your paper where you had a 7.4 and you applied just limestone, just calcium carbonate, and it lowered it to a 6.8 or whatever the case was, whatever you said it was. All you got to do is publish it, and then we'll talk. Until then, it's just anecdotes and tree octopus is all it is.
And if we can get the magnesium out of the soil, it will lower the pH, because now the soil starts to get balanced. So pH is the
So now we're up to 9 balances. It's probably a heck of a lot more than that. I missed it, but
percentage of hydrogen. If you go over to the other test, do you have the other?
What did he say?
Imagine how well that went over.
pH was the percentage of hydrogen?
And when I got his boot out of my pants as he tried to kick me out of the shop, I said, "Look, let's play with this on one fairway." So he put down some high calcium lime. And within about 6 months, we dropped a 7.4 down to a 6.8, because what was driving the pH, as is true in this case, was the magnesium. And if we can get the magnesium out of the soil, it will lower the pH because now the soil starts to get balanced. So pH is the percentage of hydrogen.
No, it's not. Joel Simmons is the most ignorant soil. He's not a scientist. He doesn't know anything about soils. It's not the percentage of hydrogen. It's the negative log of the hydrogen ion activity. Percentage hydrogen? That's what he thinks the P stands for? Good Lord. Holy moly.
If you go over to the other test, do you have the other
Yes,
test? Let's look at that real quick. So if you look at this, you can see.
Okay, so now he's looking at another test that actually shows the values. So for the audience, the pH is 7.2, the nutrient holding capacity is 10.3, and sulfur is 12, phosphorus is over 100 parts per million. Calcium is over 1,300 parts per million. The magnesium is 666 pounds per acre, so 300 parts per million. There is no need to apply calcium, magnesium, or potassium or anything in this soil at all. But on his form, he says he's 200 pounds deficient in calcium at 1,300 parts per million, 2,600 pounds per acre, and he's still recommending 200 pounds of calcium. That's the scam. That's the racket.
That bottom number in that gray area is 0% of hydrogen because the pH is above 7. So when the pH scale goes from 0 to 14, and when you hit 7, you go from an acidic soil to a basic soil. You go from a H plus hydrogen cation, H plus, to an OH hydroxyl anion, a negatively charged. So there's no more free hydrogen that the soil test will pick up.
Oh, well, if he's finally getting something right. Finally, we're 32 minutes into this thing. He's finally getting something correct. He got that correct, just so everybody knows.
So as you can see here, if you see 0% hydrogen in that gray box, you know that your pH is above 7. So what we want to do is move some of the numbers around so that hydrogen can grab some of the soil colloid.
Yeah, we want to move the hydrogen grab the soil colloid. So now we have hydrogen grabbing the soil colloid, not calcium. Oh, my God. The level of misinformation is just astounding. Just absolutely astounding. Unbelievable.
Since, and again, looking at this real easily, you can see that the majority of what's on that colloid, and again, I need my glasses to see this. So, you got a decent amount of calcium.
But you got 2,600 pounds per acre. Jesus Christ on a cracker. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
Got a real high excess of magnesium. And if you were to take 10 points off of that magnesium and put it right to hydrogen, your pH would go down to 6.3. On this soil test, if there's 10% hydrogen, your pH is always going to be 6.3. So all we're doing is trying to look at that gray box and
all he's doing is trying to look at this gray box of basic cation saturation. I could not give two flips. I don't even care about the exchangeable cations first. I care about what the turf looks like. Is it growing? Is it meeting expectations? Is it green? Is it dense? Is the customer happy? Because if it is, I couldn't care less about any of these numbers. Couldn't care less. Just shred it. Use it for Christmas gift wrapping, stuffing. Don't care. I don't care. Especially if you have not had any pre-existing conditions. The only case where you could maybe make an argument where you might want to continue soil testing if your turf grass looks perfect is if you've had a pre-existing deficiency in potassium or phosphorus or whatever the case is. In those cases, you could make an argument, well, I just want to keep track of it. Okay, well, keep track of it. But I don't care. He's looking, all I want to look at is this gray box. I don't care. I don't even care about the valid boxes, the white boxes, the calcium quantities, the magnesium, potassium quantities. So, these, I don't care even about those. If the turf is unacceptable, then I care about it. Okay, then after I've gone through water, light, temperature, damage, then I'll start caring about it. Not until then.
manipulate the numbers. And the ideal numbers here are 68% calcium, 12% magnesium, 5% potassium, 2% sodium, maybe 3% other bases, which is our trace elements, and then 10% hydrogen. That adds up to 100, and that 10% hydrogen will always give us, on this test, a pH of 6.3. So all we're going to do is look at that data sheet and try to say, okay, what's high, what's low? Let's put in what's low. Let's knock down what's high. Let's let that 98-pound weakling of hydrogen capture some of those seats in the musical chairs game. If you look at this as an analogy of musical chairs, I want 10% of those chairs to be held by hydrogen. And we can do that. And again, in this case, you can see you've got a deficiency of calcium. We'll use a little high cal lime, probably follow it up with some gypsum. Ideally, aerify it. If there's a good source of a good clean compost locally that you can apply in a volume, that would be a great way to do it.
So there's he might mention it. In their video, there was a comment said from a YouTube account called Jason Smith. It says lime to correct excess magnesium and the pH goes down. I would never have guessed that. Yeah, please don't go down the rabbit hole. It's so hard to get people to come back up out of the rabbit hole when they go down these roads. So much wasted money and resources. Lime is not going to increase acidity. Calcium carbonate is not going to increase acidity. I can't believe I'm having to say that. It's just so absurd. It's a way to get some carbon in there. But again, there's somebody asking a question about magnesium. Now, if you have really high calcium and high magnesium limestone. Oh, by the way, I believe it's the Oli gentleman on this video. He's able to select a chat and it pops up on the screen. Very, very nice. I like that approach. I can't figure out how to do that. If anybody in my audience knows how to select a chat, live chat, and then it pops up on the screen. It's really clever. I like that. I can't figure that out. Help me out if anybody knows how to do that.
Stone is not going to be the right answer. So it's when you have a deficiency of calcium and an excess of magnesium, will the magnesium be knocked off by that excess, by the incorporation of high cal lime or gypsum? So again, it's a little trick of the trade that just allows you to, keep things moving in the right direction. But if you look at that gray box, 68, 12, 5, 3, 2, 10 is where we're going to shoot for. And you can, you'll just ask the question, what's high, what's low, and apply what's low and push out what's high, because you can only have 100%.
That's the teeter-totter. That's the seesaw. I'm on one side of the seesaw and it goes up, and my friend who weighs 205 pounds gets on it and it kind of goes back down. Now I'm up in the air. Now I got to get my daughter on there who weighs 70 pounds, and now it's going to go back up on the other side. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, keep going up and up and up until we got 45 people on the seesaw. Meanwhile, we didn't need to do any of that. We either have enough or we don't. The balance of these cations in agricultural systems and in turfgrass systems, on native soils and on putting greens, every time we've done it, it's always been the same conclusion, and that is the balances are irrelevant, and there's never been a single confirmed valid case where the balancing these cations is a more efficient way of managing nutrients than the slant approach or the sufficiency level approach. Go back and look at all those videos I did.
That's what it's all about, is keeping it balanced.
No, it's not. What it's all about to me, keeping the grass green, keeping it growing, keeping the customer happy. That's what I care about. If it's green, dense, growing great, couldn't care less about any of these numbers. And before, like I said, before I even get to these numbers, I'm starting with water. I'm starting with light and temperature to know the seasonal influences. What season is it? And then I'm looking at abiotic and biotic injury from pests. In fact, I was with a client last week, and he has some nutrient deficiencies, and you can see it. I posted a picture on the community tab. But the nutrient deficiencies are a function of at least two things, and that is there enough nutrient in the soil, and can the plant take it up? So if there's enough from a soil test to indicate that there's enough in the soil, but you're still seeing nutrient deficiencies, how can that happen? Well, if there's a bug eating on the roots, or you've applied an abiotic factor like, say, pendimethalin or something that will prune the roots, and it doesn't have the ability to take up those nutrients, then, or at least to the extent it needs to, then you might actually be seeing a nutrient deficiency as a result of the actual plant not being able to take it up. And in this case, he sent me a test, I guess it was yesterday, day before yesterday, after I met with him last week. He did a nematode test, and the nematodes are 410 sting. The limit on sting, I'm not a specialist in nematology, but I believe the limit on sting is somewhere like 10 to 20 sting per 100 cc of soil. And he's at 400. So it's very likely that the nutrient deficiency that I'm seeing and the unacceptable turf that I'm seeing is a result of nematode damage, not just nutrient deficiencies, because in that soil there actually was a manganese deficiency as well. So he had two things working against him. I don't care about all these numbers. I don't care about the nematode numbers. I don't care about any of that stuff. But when the turf looks bad, we have to start diagnosing it. And I don't start with a soil test. I will actually have them do a soil test and send it off so that I can actually, because it's going to take some time to get the numbers back. I don't want to wait on that. But I'm not going down the roads of, oh, it's soil this and it's balancing this and it's calcium this. I don't go by that at all until way, way, way down the road. I never go to balancing. I go to critical limits, or pH and things like that. But that's way after I've checked a lot of boxes. Okay, and I encourage you to consider the same. I'm going to do a couple more minutes, then I'm going to have to go today, guys.
There was a question in the Fescue Freaks the other day about what is the perfect organic matter percent?
Oh, I don't know what Joel's going to say. I haven't watched this far into the video. But I can tell you right now, there is no perfect organic matter percent. Okay, there is none. You can have, generally speaking, I don't know why so many people are overly worried about having too much organic matter on things other than putting greens. Putting greens, we have a compaction issue and a soft issue, and then there's some issues with the firmness of the green. When you get too much, that can be a thatch related as well. But I mean, I'd probably rather have a little more organic matter than a little too little organic matter generally, but there's no perfect organic matter percentage. Let's see what Joel Simmons from Earthworks has to say about that.
Is there such thing?
There isn't really. I mean, it depends on where you are. Now, if you
his audio cut out, but I think he said there isn't really. Good job. Well done, Joel.
were a sand-built, soccer field or a sand-built green, golf course green, and you had 5% organic matter, that would be a huge red flag to me. But if this was your home lawn and you had 5% organic matter, I'd be pretty happy with that, assuming I can answer the question, is it good organic matter or is it not?
Yeah, I think what Joel's going to argue is that the organic matter can be thatch, but in soil testing, we don't include the thatch in the organic matter analysis. So let me see what he says first.
And you can tell that by feeling it, by looking at it, by knowing what's going on. If it's thatch, and if you've ever pulled a sample, a probe out of your soil, and you've seen and felt thatch. I mean, if you pull a probe with a probe, you can feel that top. It's very tight. It's very compacted. It doesn't crumble.
Okay, tight and compacted. I think that's 10.
That's thatch. If it crumbles and it's nice and loose, that is basically a good humus thing.
So let me just explain what happens when we do organic matter analysis. There's a couple different ways we do analysis. We can do the chemical analysis of organic matter, or we can do by combustion. Generally, combustion is used just because it's quicker, and you don't have to deal with a bunch of chemicals. But we don't measure the organic matter from the leaves down. We remove everything above ground. We remove that section, and we measure from the soil surface down. So it shouldn't contain any thatch. So anything from the soil surface down would be a valid organic matter analysis. So if it's good organic matter or bad organic matter, the thatch generally I would not consider as an organic matter that generally a homeowner would think of as a healthy sort of organic matter. It's not going to be one that breaks down and releases nutrients like you would buy some, peat or something at the big box store and mix it into your flower bed or something. It's not that. The thatch is going to take a long time because it's very lignaceous. It's going to take a long time to break that down. But that's not included in most. I've never included that in soil organic matter analysis. I guess maybe if you don't know what you're doing, you throw it in there, you could do that. But even in the lab, they're not going to include that in the organic matter analysis. So I think he's confused here.
Question here, is it true that gypsum will help with compaction?
I don't know what he's going to say. It is true that gypsum will help with compaction in sodic soils that have been dispersed as a result of the level of sodium. That is true. But in no other situation that I'm aware of will the application of gypsum alleviate soil compaction and increase, soil percolation, saturated hydraulic conductivity. In no other situation will it do that. Even if you have high sodium, it does not necessarily mean that you have a sodic situation. For example, you could have high sodium in Florida. I don't care where you're at in Florida. You're not going to have sodic soils to the point where it's going to be compacted because it's all sand. There's no putting green that's a USGA or California style putting green or sand-capped sport field that's ever going to have a chemical form of compaction as a result of sodium because there's no clays in those soils. Okay, so it can happen on sodic soils. In every other situation, gypsum has no influence on soil compaction. Okay, let's see what Joel Simmons says.
It can help with compaction if calcium is needed. It's not
okay. So he's again back on base saturation. I should have said that. I should have thought that. He's still down the rabbit hole. He's not thinking of sodic soils because he's not a valid soil scientist. He's actually thinking whatever base kind of saturation or whatever he's thinking. Okay, so he's thinking still with calcium in basic saturation. Let's finish the answer.
Always going to help with compaction, and that's not the only thing that gypsum will do. Gypsum is calcium sulfate. You're bringing sulfur to the table. You're bringing calcium to the table. It can help eliminate some of that, but if you have a big calcium deficiency and a lot of excess, gypsum's not going to help with compaction at all. You've got to get that limestone in there, that mineral in there, and you got to get volume. You can't really get volume with gypsum. In the case,
well, why not? Well, one, you don't need the volume. You don't need to apply the lime and all this other for calcium. You don't need to do that at all. But if the argument is you want to apply lime rather than gypsum because you need the volume, you can apply volumes of gypsum. What's the problem with that? You're probably more likely to see a response from gypsum applications because it's coming along with sulfate, particularly in low sulfate sulfurs. You might see that. But in terms of alleviation and compaction, forget about it. Sodic soils, it is your friend. Gypsum and leaching is really the only solution to alleviating compaction in sodic soils, but not in non-sodic soils. Non-sodic soils, the only value to gypsum would be the alleviation of a calcium deficiency, which is rare, very, very rare, but it can happen, or the alleviation of sulfate deficiency, which is actually more common. So if you say, well, Travis, I don't believe you because I applied gypsum, I saw a response. I believe it's likely you saw a response. It's probably from the sulfate is more likely because our soils are generally lower in sulfates now than they were in the 80s and 90s. And in some exceedingly strange, rare cases, you could have a calcium deficiency and it might be alleviating that deficiency. But that's why you might see a response to gypsum in very rare cases, not because it's alleviating compaction in non-sodic soils.
Where you've got 60% calcium, gypsum can be a good solution. Anytime you're above 60% calcium, gypsum is going to help. If you're below 60,
by the way, he's just making this up. There's nothing in the literature to support what he's saying at all.
60% calcium, gypsum's not going to help with compaction enough. You need to put limestone in there, and you need to get that. You need to really get that volume in there. You need to start creating that environment where biology can do its thing. And ultimately, what's going to make that work is getting carbon in there and feeding the soil and getting.
There's carbon again. Then there's feeding the soil. There's carbon. There's feeding the soil. Okay, I'm keeping track of this as best I can on the score sheet.
Biology working.
Well, I'm going to stop it there at 37 minutes and 27 seconds. We're going to come back to this again. I'm not even halfway through it, and I don't know how long this is going to go. I can only take so much misinformation before I just got to take a break. But I'm going to show one last little thing here on an article. There's a reason why I'm keeping score of this, what he's saying. And the reason I'm keeping score of what he's saying over and over and over is because there is an effect called illusory truth and repeated statements. And again, I'm not convinced that Joel Simmons is intelligent enough to actually know about this. I don't think he reads any of this stuff, nor is he aware that this is actually a valid methodology, scam methodology. But repeated statements do have an effect on your belief. This paper was published in April of 2024, so this year, in the Journal of Current Opinion in Psychology, volume 56, by Jessica Udry and Sarah Barber from Georgia State, I think it was. Georgia State? Georgia State. Okay, so they're at Georgia State, and they published this review paper about all the other literature. I'm just going to read the abstract. And we're talking about repeating the statements over and over and over. I have a score sheet here where he said balance at least 10 times already. He's used the words tight and compacted over 10 times already, carbon 4 or 5 times, and feed the soil a couple times. He's repeating this over and over and over. And if we know that this effect is a valid effect, we can guard ourselves against it. And the abstract of this paper says this. Repetition increases belief in information, a phenomenon known as the illusory truth effect. In laboratory experiments, the illusory truth effect has often been examined using general trivia statements as stimuli, but repetition also increases belief in misinformation, such as fake news headlines and conspiracy beliefs. Repetition even increases belief in claims that are implausible or that contradict prior knowledge. So if you learn this information, you learn, hey, this is what's going on. And Travis and the slant effect or the slant method and all this is the way we should do it. And then you kind of get off the road and you hear someone saying base count saturation over and over and over and over. Even when you know what the truth is, you can still fall victim to believing misinformation when it's repeated enough times. Repetition also has a broader impact on beyond belief, such as increasing sharing intentions of news headlines and decreasing how unethical an act is perceived to be. Although the illusory truth effect is robust, some interventions reduce its magnitude, including instruction to focus on accuracy and awareness of the illusory truth effect. These strategies may be effective for reducing belief in misinformation, and that's what I'm doing on this channel. I am including instructions to focus on the accuracy and awareness or accuracy of valid information, evidence-based information, and I'm making you aware of certain flaws and fallacies in reasoning, and in this case, the illusory truth effect. I'm doing my best, at least, to educate and promote, communicate what is true as much as I can, because on the other end, I'm outnumbered by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are doing the opposite, providing misinformation or disinformation. And when I'm keeping a score sheet on the number of times Joel Simmons says balance and tight and compacted, I'm doing that because I'm aware that the number of times you repeat it, the more likely it is that you're going to believe it, even if you are aware of what is true. Okay, so we're going to come back to the Barnum effect and this video at some point in the future. Next week we have a video. I think it's on micronutrients. Next week we're going to be doing next Tuesday, Thanksgiving week. But I'm going to come back to this. I'm barely halfway through it, but I'll do my best to maybe just let it run next time instead of commenting so much. But it's hard. It's really hard to listen to this misinformation because I am so I'm just so interested and concerned about the future and the direction of the turfgrass industry. When you have this much misinformation being perpetuated out there, there needs to be somebody on the other end, and somebody on the other end is generally science, faculty members and people doing research, but they're not out doing this. They're not out marketing and communicating in this fashion. So they're busy doing valid science. So I'm doing my best. Tonight, I'll be back tonight. We're going to do comments and emails tonight at, I think it's 9 p.m. I have some voicemails I'm going to be going over. So if you've left me some voicemails, you'll probably hear that on the show tonight, as well as emails and comments. Okay. Not too many hate mail comments, not too many. There's only a few in there, but we'll go through them, and I'm going to go through a couple little explanations of nutrient deficiencies as well. I believe I'm going to try to fit that in tonight. Okay, guys and gals. Thanks so much for showing up. I'm sorry if there was a technical issue here or there. I'll see you guys tonight. Thanks. Bye.